Oh my god, this is really a very steep staircase. Oh my god.
Look at this.
What is going on in here?
This is a train room.
X-H1. This is Fuji's new flagship camera in their X series line, stealing the same sensor from the fantastic X-T2. This model promises advanced filmmaking capabilities. So, does it deliver on this promise? Sort of. We promise we'll get to all of the beauty shots and nerd out on all the technical details of using this camera as a filmmaking tool. But if you're like us and get impatient, the too long didn't read version is the X-H1 is close to being perfect, but falls short.
For photography, the X-H1 is one of the best we've ever used. For filmmaking though, features such as the autofocus and high frame rate modes are unreliable and often a hassle to use. But we love that Fuji's finally competing with the likes of Panasonic, Sony, and Canon for video.
So, let's grab a drink, sit back, grab another drink, and let's get into the X-H1.
We used the X-H1 on multiple shoots, in an abandoned farmhouse, in some forest ruins, and playing on a snow day. The first thing you realize when using this camera is the fantastic build quality. The metal body is well made and shaped like a dream. The sub-LCD screen on top features a beautiful display with useful information. The switches and dials feel amazing in your hands. It makes you want to touch this camera a lot. When it comes to specs though, this camera never lived up to its competitors. Its lack of 60 frames per second at 4K hurts, and its 8-bit 200 megabit 4K files are paltry compared to the new GH5S's 400 megabit 10-bit 4K files. So why do we even want to look at this camera? Well, to understand a little bit more about the Fuji X-H1, we need a quick history lesson.
In 1934, Fujifilm is born and becomes one of the biggest names in photographic and motion picture film stock, dominating the film market in Japan, while Kodak dominated the US market.
Kodak's got the instant camera you've been waiting for.
Once the digital revolution of the 1980s began, decisions had to be made. Kodak focused on film, while Fuji prepared for the digital age. And they did well, but of course not as well as Canon and Nikon. But still better than Kodak, which filed for bankruptcy in 2012. 2011 brought the Fuji X100. This camera had a massive cult following, with beautifully designed mechanical switches and an amazing color aesthetic. 2 years later, the X100S was released, which we purchased and instantly fell in love with. Which brings us to 2018, when Fuji released their first video-focused mirrorless camera, the X-H1.
Now the image quality of the X-H1 does look great. Yes, the specs are weaker than its competitors, but it still produces clean and aesthetically pleasing images with grading latitude. The lack of 60 FPS at 4K though is a huge bummer, as almost every camera today implements this feature. Yes, the 60 FPS at 1080p looks good, but at 120 FPS the camera really begins to struggle. The autofocus on this system is downright unreliable, and that's putting it politely. You'll spend the majority of the time wanting to chuck this camera high into the air, and when the autofocus does finally work, you'll turn your face to the sun and shed a single tear of gratitude.
The camera's 5-axis in-body image stabilization, though, is fantastic. It makes handheld shooting a dream, and combined with 60 frames per second, you might just swear the camera's on a gimbal or dolly. But like the camera's other features, it's hit or miss. Panning left and right produced the infamous jello effect, and zooming in and out created a whole new mess of distortion. While we've loved the Fuji menu system in the past, it's become exhausting now. Lots of settings are buried in pages of menus, and use Fuji's proprietary acronyms. For example, AFC is custom autofocus, not continuous. There's a performance boost mode, 7 different sub-menus for autofocus, 3 dynamic range modes, and 7 modes for the front and rear indicator lights to know you're recording. While we love the ability to customize our shooting experience, half the options felt unnecessary and clunky. Like Crocs. Everyone wants different colored shoes, but but no one needs multiple colors of Crocs.
The camera has a slew of film emulation modes, but come on, sepia? F-Log is only usable at ISO 800 and above, which is another huge bummer. The Eterna mode is a good balance though between dynamic range and a semi-baked in color profile. The camera's low light capabilities are just alright. Not Sony A7 series good, but good enough. At 5 or 6,000 ISO, it's just enough to capture your decorated plate at a farm-to-table restaurant in Brooklyn lit only by some vegan wicker candles. The strangest thing about this camera though is that every time you use it, you just want to take photos. Seriously, you pick up this camera trying to film something and you end up taking photos instead. It's so frustratingly good as a photography camera that with every shot you begin to whisper to yourself, I could make a slideshow instead. And this is the issue with this camera. If you're a photographer who just happens to grab some video clips, the X-H1 is fantastic. But if you're a filmmaker looking for a solid mirrorless camera that can also take some great photos, well then we think you should keep looking.
So Fuji, you're close. You're close to perfecting an aesthetic that delivers on both stills and video. But for now, you're a few steps away from realizing that dream. And next time you better include a proper screen that flips forward, not this weird sort of angled screen.